I don't care if you're the oldest man alive or if you're a 13-year-old. You've only seen this one time in your lifetime. Oh, yeah. It's Locked On HBCU. Play my music.
You are Locked On HBCU, your daily podcast covering HBCU sports. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, family? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On HBCU podcast, your number one daily one-stop shop for everything HBCU athletics, Monday through Friday, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And I, of course, am Darian Gray, a.k.a. the Mouth of the South, Texas Southern alum and former TSU Herald Sports editor and current contributing writer at USA Today's Saints Wire. Thank you for going on this journey with me. Make a Locked On HBCU your first listen of the day every day. And remember, just because the mic cuts off does not mean that the journey is over. It just means it's time to follow me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Starts with an S and ends with an S. Today's episode is brought to you by Nissan. And are you the kind of driver that always wants to push things a little bit farther? Wonder what's the next adventure around the corner for you? Well, take the Nissan Rogue, Pathfinder, or Armada and go find your next big adventure and check them all out at nissanusa.com. We close out today's episode with a look at the CIAA tournament that we have seen thus far. Before that, we'll look at the games you need to watch over the weekend outside of just this conference finals, but then also, and I'm excited for this one because this is a little bit of history, and this is our lead segment. It's our Feature Friday. We rarely lead the show with Feature Friday unless it's a full episode thing, so you know that this is special. I don't know if you're a 13-year-old checking this out. Don't know if you're 50. Don't know if you're 70, 80. You could be the oldest man in the world listening to Locked On HBCU. I'd appreciate you for making this the first listen of your day every day. And I'm going to tell you this right now. What we're about to speak about, you have only seen one time in 2018. North Carolina Central and Texas Southern faced off in the NCAA tournament. We'll get to Norfolk and Texas Southern as the only two teams who have ever won in the same year from an HBCU. But right now, we're going to focus on the only time that two HBCUs have faced off against each other in the NCAA tournament. Only one time in the, it came to be in 1939. So you're looking at 85 years. In the 85 years that the NCAA tournament has been around, you've only seen this once, and I hope we never see it again. I'm just going to be honest with you. I hope that we never see this again. As much as I love watching our HBCUs face off, I don't want to see them face off against each other in the NCAA tournament because it's not good for representation, in my opinion. I can see how somebody would say it is because it's an HBCU showcase, but it's not good because you have less HBCUs out there. But more importantly, it ain't good for the money. It's not good for the money. It might guarantee that you get one team to win and you're going to guarantee to have one team in. But I'm not a fan of it because you could have two teams in, which is the Norfolk, Texas Southern situation I was speaking about. And I think that's way more likely that you're able to have two HBCUs win a game in March Madness as opposed to kind of hoping for an HBCU versus HBCU game, as cool as that would be. So you know what time it is. It's March 1st, which means that new Q drop. But it also means that it's March Madness. It also means that it's time to start keeping your channels on TBS and TNT. It also means that it's literally the pinnacle of collegiate basketball on the men's and women's side. This is, if you're a fan of the sport, the best time for you. And I have some great memories. I still remember being in class, everybody on their phone looking at March Madness on the, like that's what we were doing when we was kids and I was in high school. We'd get the work done and it's on the March Madness. I swear it felt like we had less work in that time frame. I don't know, but that's what it felt like. So it's a really nice time if you love college basketball. And it's really the best time because even the people who don't love college basketball love March Madness. Now, if you're HBCU centric and you don't really venture out to the other schools and you don't go to some of the Power 4, is Power 5 still a thing there? Probably so, yeah. So Power 5, maybe you don't go out to all of those schools, whatever. That's not your cup of tea. You're probably not the biggest fan of the March basketball season. Yes, you get conference tournaments. Right now, the CIAA is going on. Next up is the SIAC. Then you got the MEAC and the SWAC after that. But that's what you're really getting, you know? But on the other hand, March Madness is not exciting for HBCUs. You get a maximum of 3, 4 in all of postseason play, not just looking at March Madness on each side, right? Each gender. 3 to 4. You might get 2 in the NCAA tournament, maybe 1 in the NIT. That's about it, though, usually. It's not a great time. So when you look at the lack of teams who are in these games, why would I want them to face off against each other? You may love to see Central versus Texas Southern. Oh, well, it'll be a good game. We don't like it because they're always competitive, or it's not competitive when they face a number 1 seed. I hear you and I get you, but there's a certain amount of payout that comes from winning a game. The way that this was able to happen is both of these teams ended up being in the essentially what is the NCAA play-in. I still to this day view the NCAA tournament as a 64-team bracket, even though I'm well aware that it's 68. I view this as a play-in type of moment. But regardless, if you win the play-in, you get the full bread. Like each game that you win in the NCAA tournament is a certain amount of dollars, right? And it gets paid out every single year for 5 years, and you get to stack them up. Like that's how this works. If you get to play in the play-in and you win, it's almost like, or it is like you won an actual game and you get paid that check. Why would I want to decrease my odds? Every time 2 HBCU players or teams come into the NCAA tournament, you have a chance for 2 checks. If they play each other, I get a chance for 1. So I wasn't a fan of it. I hope that it doesn't happen again. As much as I love seeing our HBCUs face off against each other, economically, it just don't make no sense to me. But that happened in 2018. And you already know who won. You already know it. Texas Southern. It's what we do. Like this is what we do. We play basketball. And I was in school for this. And honestly, man, that was a special team. 2018. That was and I can screw the notes, right? I don't need that anymore. It's funny because that was probably the second best team that I watched at TSU, but it wasn't my favorite. It was probably my least favorite. And you couldn't have convinced me that would have been my least favorite when watching it. My freshman year team was Zach Lofton. That was my squad. Like I really enjoyed Zach Lofton as a player. To me, was a player that I really enjoyed watching. But then my sophomore year, this 2018 year that we're talking about now, that's when Trey Jefferson took it up a notch. He was the number 2 option in 2017. Then he stepped up to number 1. That's when he was dynamic at the point. That's when he was the SWAC player of the year. Then you had a young Trayvon Reed. I mean, like looking at the guys who are on this team, it's like, dang, he was there then. You know, this is my undergrad. It makes me miss these moments. Young Trayvon Reed. Like I remember an older Trayvon Reed, but a young Trayvon Reed was different. You know, ain't had no hair, rim protector, high flyer as far as just being a big man and always having to pick and roll with Trey. Like I love these moments. These moments were great. You had Derek Bruce, or not Derek Bruce. Let me make sure I get his name right because they had Dante Clark. Yeah, Derek Bruce. He had the sharp shooting from outside on the perimeter, and I remember because he had these cream color shoes on, bro. And every time he used to make a shot without taking off his Timbs. And if you watch the Boondocks, you know how they go. This was just a special moment overall. And man, just thinking about that team, thinking about that year, it was special. It was special. It wasn't even close against Central. All love to my guy Josh. Shout out HBCU Nightly, support the brand. But it wasn't even close that game. It wasn't even close, and it wasn't supposed to be. But yeah, that was a special year. It's the only time that happened. I didn't say that to brag about TSU or anything like that, though it ended up turning into that. But overall, this is the only time in history that you've seen that done. And it was a very special team. Trey Jefferson was somebody who was highly anticipated. I think that many people were like, dang, he was the number 2 the first year he was at TSU. And I didn't quite understand it because I didn't know about him. I didn't know about Baller's Life, Trey Jefferson. But then I seen it in my sophomore years. Very special team, very special moment. Whether you're 13 or you're 113, you've only ever seen this one time. North Carolina Central, Texas Southern facing off in the NCAA tournament. two HBCUs in the 85-year history facing off against each other in the NCAA tournament has happened one time, and that was in 2018. Now, as we push forward, got a couple of games to watch over the weekend, Saturday and Sunday. And to me, it's highlighted by the fact that North Carolina A&T women's basketball could be playing for the number 1 seed in the CAA or the CAA. Today's episode is brought to you by Nissan. Now, are you one of those people who like, I love adventure. I just want to roll. I want to go anywhere. I'm waiting. What's the next adventure around the corner? I don't know, but I'm going to find out. If you're one of those people who always want to push their limits in the vehicle, then go ahead and go get one of these Nissan SUVs. And I would suggest the Rogue off top. It's perfect for your city drives. It's great for your escapes, right? Say you want to go elsewhere. You don't want to just be on the city on the highways. That's fine. They have the Google built in, so you ain't got to connect your phone. It's on a display. Everything is there for you. It's very simplistic and it's very high tech, so we love that. We love that. Easy for you. The 2024 Rogue is a perfect mid-sized crossover for your next adventure. But maybe you don't want to go that way. Maybe you prefer to go to the Pathfinder, which has room for 8. It has 284 horsepower and up to 6,000 pounds towing. So when adventure calls, go ahead and get the Pathfinder. They're there to pick up the phone. You're there to drive. Whether it's the Pathfinder, the Rogue, or the Armada, go to NissanUSA.com to look at their new SUVs. That's NissanUSA.com. As we continue rolling on today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day, every day. For your second listen, make sure you're checking out Locked On Sports Today. Yes, like a pimp named Slickback, you say the whole thing. Of Locked On Sports Today, and look at the first of its kind 24/7 live sports network on YouTube. Go to Locked On Sports Today and subscribe. We've looked at the only time that two HBCUs have faced off in March Madness, but you got a couple of HBCUs with some very important games over the weekend. And I specify weekend for a reason. Let's actually keep the TSU talk going so that we can just abandon my alma mater rather than come back to them. But TSU versus Alcorn men's basketball. Very important game, and it's likely going to be the deciding matchup for the number 3 seed in the SWAC when the tournament rolls around. Now, it's a pivotal point for both teams because they could still climb to the 2nd seed, or they could drop down to 5 or even lower. That's the pivotal moment. And I think that this game will be very important for both of them. I don't think that the winner, I don't think that the loser will be able to get to number 2. Technically, they could both get to 1. Grambling's at 1 right now, but they have a 3-game lead on these guys with 4 games left. Listen, I understand that Grambling is my favorite HBCU to ever be created, and I love bashing Grambling, but I don't think that they're going to lose 3 out of their last 4 games. I don't think that it happens. Okay. And they have the tiebreaker on both of these squads. So you would need to win out. They would need to lose 3 of their last 4 in order for you to even get to winning that. I just don't see it happening. I just don't. Both of these teams arguably could lose another game, even if they won on Saturday. And I don't think Grambling's going to lose 3 out of the 4. So it's just unlikely in my opinion. But when I'm looking at this victory for Alcorn, they have more games than TSU does. TSU is one of only 4 schools in the SWAC who's played 15 games, which means if they win this game, they have less room to go wrong. They only got 2 games left, Jackson State and PV, right? But Alcorn on the other side, if they win, well, now you're still looking at Southern, but you get TSU down. And you would have to beat TSU by more than they beat you the first time. But at this point, these tiebreakers, I'm not even getting into them for real. Alcorn is looking at a situation where they can put Jackson State in the rear view, which already is there. You could put TSU in the rear view. Bethune-Cookman is in the rear view. And now you're completely in the driver's seat and you chasing down Southern. You're chasing down Southern. TSU, I do think they have a lot more room to grow. I believe that they could strongly get the 2 seed if they win this game. And if they beat Alcorn and then they beat Jackson State on Monday, you're really looking at a school that Southern has some tough matchups. I think that if TSU has to play PV with the number 2 seed on the line and how everything's gone for both of those schools this year, I'm going to take TSU, even in the rivalry game. Now let's look at the game that I think is really the highlight. This is the one I really think is the highlight. North Carolina A&T women's basketball, they arguably, or not arguably, they could be playing for the number 1 seed in the CAA on Sunday. They got 3 games a week, so they don't play on a Saturday, Monday schedule that you see the MEAC and SWAC play on. But on Sunday, North Carolina A&T will be playing Stony Brook. Stony Brook is currently the number 1 seed at 12-2. North Carolina A&T is the number 2 seed at 11-3. The reason I say possibly, not because the season isn't over, but because there's a game tonight. So I'm recording this Thursday night as usual. You know the schedule. I'm going to say it every time just in case, you're new to the show. But even then, you look at when this is posted, it's going to be posted Friday morning. Like that, this is just it's a dead giveaway. Hey, this was recorded before this game happened, and it's going to happen Friday night. If North Carolina A&T wins this game, nothing changes. If they lose the game, then you're probably not playing for the number 1 seed, and you're really going to be tied. Excuse me. You could be tied with 2 teams from who have 4 losses. I think William and Mary. I can't remember the 2 teams right now, but they don't even matter. The point is North Carolina A&T versus Stony Brook has the ability, if everybody wins their game on Friday, to be a number 1 seed deciding factor. At the end of the day, if North Carolina A&T wins the next 2 games, they'll be 13-3. At best, Stony Brook can be 13-3. This is the first time that these 2 teams have faced off, which means North Carolina A&T will have the tiebreaker. And it's the only time they're going to face off. So that's what I mean when I say this is a deciding game for that spot. Now, the last thing I want to look at is Alabama A&M versus Alabama State. Very briefly, but these 2 teams are fighting it out for the last spot in the SWAC tournament. 8-9. That's where they're sitting at right now. Alabama State won the first game, so they're in the tournament right now. If they win the next game, they'll have some distance, basically a 2-game lead, despite the fact that it'll only be 1 in record. You'll still be looking at a 2-game lead because you have the tiebreaker. And that there's 3 games left. They'll probably be okay. And they'll probably get that last spot at worst, maybe even move up to 7 because there's 3 teams right now tied at 7 and 8 for, ironically, they're tied at 7 and 8 record-wise, and then in standings, they're 7, 8, 9. But Alabama A&M, they obviously need to win this game, but then they also need to win by more than 17 points. Otherwise, they still lose the tiebreaker due to point differential. So that's something to look at. But as we push forward, I want to look at the CIAA tournament. We've seen some of these games. I'm having a difficult time covering these games on the show just because it feels like things get outdated. But I still want to look at what we have now that the week is coming to a close as we continue with Locked On HBCU. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel, and FanDuel is the official sports book of the Locked On Podcast Network. If you're new to FanDuel, go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn, as everybody should be doing. But if you're new to FanDuel, go to the website and use the code LOCKEDON. It'll get you $150 back in bonus bets if you put down a $5 winning bet. It's just that simple. So go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn and make every moment more. Basketball, hockey, golf, like whatever the sport is, it doesn't matter. The NFL draft is coming up, all these things. If you get there before the game, go ahead and put on some for Wemby, right? Go ahead and put something down with Tyrese Halliburton or De'Aaron Fox. Like, you have all these guys that you can pick from. But if you get there in the middle of the game, nothing changes. Now, instead of going with pregame bets, you can go ahead and go with some live betting. So it's up to you. Go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn and use the code LockedOn to make every moment more. As we're wrapping up today's episode of Locked On HBCU, I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day, making it all the way to segment 3, and I thank you 2 times for that. Let's look to see if anything has changed in the CIAA, because I want to preview what's going on here. I want to preview what we have seen, or review and precap. What am I doing today? Preview. I say review and precap. I want to review and recap what we've had going on the show. So let's just go through the opening rounds. I find it very difficult to cover tournament action because I personally feel like everything gets outdated so fast, it's not worth covering. but we're at the end of the week and we really haven't touched on the CIAA. But that's just how I feel. It's like by the time 12 o'clock rolls around on the day I drop the episode, something else could happen. I'm sitting here talking about the only upset to go down, and then first game of the session is an upset. And, you know, I'll be honest with you, a lot of folks don't be checking the timestamp. So they be like, oh, you didn't see this? No, this was posted 2 hours before it came out. 2 hours before this game happened, I post this episode. I post episode at 5 a.m. But it's okay, because I appreciate the interaction, especially the interaction on the Grambling episode from a couple of days ago. But anywho, and I record early, so it's just a little difficult to make sure I grasp everything. But as of right now, we do have a couple of teams who have made it to the CIAA semifinals. So let's go over the opening round upsets, and then also look at the SIAC rankings and matchups of the opening round real quick before we get out of here. So we saw 2 upsets in the opening round of the CIAA tournament. Both were 6-3. And both were overtime games. And I understand folks might point to, oh, well, you know, 7 seed beat a 6 seed. There ain't no upset. That's not an upset. 5 beating 4, not an upset. 2 beating 1, not an upset. 7 beating 6 is not an upset. That's just a game where you had a lower seed. You know, like that's the big difference. But 6 knocking off 3, ranking wise, 1,000% is an upset. And on the women's side, you had Shaw over Virginia Union. These 2 teams were very close record-wise. So if you want to say it wasn't that much of a separation between the 2, this isn't an upset, I would understand where you're coming from on that. But as far as ranking-wise, it definitely was. And this was a tightly contested matchup. Largest lead was 7 points in the first quarter. That didn't last long. Had a couple of 6-point leads here and there. But those are the largest leads of the game. Back and forth. And then you get into overtime. There was a little 5-1 stretch by Shaw that put it in overtime. I don't even want to call it a run. It's just a stretch. But it was 5-1 to close that fourth quarter, and that's how you ended up tying the game. It was definitely big time buckets. Don't get me wrong, but it's just not enough points to be a run. But in OT, it was scoreless for a little bit, and then you had a layup with 4 seconds left that gave Shaw the game-winning bucket, and you had another opportunity, but Virginia Union couldn't knock it down. Then the other one you had was Bluefield State knocking off Winston-Salem State, the defending CIAA champions. And this kind of reminds me of when Coppin State went on their little run. And I know I'm saying this probably by the time this comes out, it'll be over. Bluefield State Cinderella run will be no more. The glass slipper will be shattered, right? But this win here alone, it reminded me of Coppin State, because now there was a big discrepancy here. See, when you're looking at Union and Shaw on the women's side, it wasn't a big discrepancy in record. But here, Bluefield was 4-13. Winston-Salem was 13-5. You're basically mirroring those records. This is what it reminds me of Coppin State, when Coppin went in there and they knocked off the 2 seed, knocked off the 3 seed. Then they ended up playing the 1 seed. They didn't win that game. So it wasn't a full Cinderella story, but that's just what it feels like for some reason, because the records are so low and so polar opposites. I almost want to say that's what the MEAC records were, just completely flipped. Those things make sense, or those things are kind of common to me. They relate to me. But yeah, so now let's get into the SIAC opening round matchups. We don't have any games. Matter of fact, let me refresh my Twitter one more time, because Claflin, had the men's and women's team. They both made the semifinals. Let me see if I can go to Twitter and see if they'll tell me who won this other matchup. Maybe it's not done yet, but right now we're waiting on 2 more quarterfinal matchups to be over. In the SIAC, you got Lane versus Albany State in that first Sunday game on the men's side. All of these are men's teams. Lemoyne-Owen versus Fort Valley State. Edward Waters versus Central State. Kentucky State versus Savannah State. And then the Allen will face the winner of Lane versus Albany. And those are your opening round matchups. On the women's side, you got Lemoyne-Owen versus Benedict. Albany State versus Spring Hill. Tuskegee versus Allen. Edward Waters versus Central State. And on the bye week side, or bye round, if that's how you want to call it, Clark and Morehouse, Miles and Tuskegee on the men's side. And then you have Savannah State, Kentucky State, Miles, and then Savannah State, Kentucky State, Miles, and then Fort Valley State on the women's side as those who have a bye straight into the quarterfinals. So that's our D2 recap, preview. A lot of they call it the review and pre-cap. But yeah, that's the preview of the SIAC and the recap of CIAA. We'll have more of that when we come back next week for action. So just be on the lookout. I'm going to try to be better when it comes to the D1 tournaments because I have better time to be able to dedicate myself during the day. So we'll see about that. But I appreciate you for making this your first listen of the day every day. We'll be back on Monday's episode to recap the weekend of action and any other big stories that drop in the meantime, in between time. So in that meantime, in between time, if you're looking for me, you can find me on Twitter at South Exclusives. Until next time that we hear each other, family, take care, stay blessed. Peace.